You
So
miss
you
it?
miss me now, huh?
I do. Do you miss it? Are you glad that you're
Oh,
retired?
with COVID, I have missed it a lot. Um, I don't miss getting up at 5 every morning and getting hitting the road and the a muchness of it. But I miss being with people and I miss feeling like I can make a difference because particularly in COVID, I mean, when it was first happening, particularly, I could imagine myself sitting at some of these tables and being a part of conversations where decisions would being made. I'm also going to play with my lighting a little bit here. Is that better? I know one more thing.
You look fabulous.
Oh, well, thank you. Um, I could imagine that. And it felt so helpless not to be there. And then as the months have rolled on, I kind of was able to let some of that go and just trust that it's going to be okay. But then it's just lonely. I mean, yeah, I'm as an introvert, I'm still a social being. So
Oh,
yeah,
yeah. So being an essential worker has allowed me to maintain the little bit that I need as also a similar profound introvert.
yeah, yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
well, maybe we jump right into it. Um,
Okay.
and thank you again for doing this. I really appreciate it.
Oh, well, I appreciate being asked.
Um,
So
these have been a lot of fun to connect with people and try to share a little bit of advice to those of us who are a little bit newer on the
yeah,
path.
that's cool.
So why don't you start us off by telling us a little bit about your journey finding chaplaincy and through chaplaincy?
Mm. Well, finding chaplaincy, in order to be ordained, in seminary, I had to do a unit of CPE. And when I was in that unit, I discovered there was such a thing as chaplaincy
Mm.
and what the role was. And I actually discovered that I was not very good at it and not very comfortable with it. However, I mean, I did learn some things that made me a little bit better, but I also learned I love CPE and I love the work of the group and being able to ask questions and to learn about myself and on so many different levels. And there were some profound changes that happened within that process for me. I went on to become a parish pastor for about 10 years because I value experience. But after about 10 years, I knew, where do I want to go next? And it was probably a larger church or it was going to be a CPE supervisor. And so I went back and did a residency. Chaplaincy was never one of the choices. um, but so I went to become a CPE supervisor and have, held space for people who are growing and learning for probably 15 years. And during that time is when I first learned about palliative care. So, I mean, I have a great appreciation for chaplains and people who sit at the bedside, and I can really do it a lot better than I once could, but it is hard. It is really hard to do.
What's
So,
the what's the toughest part about being a chaplain then? Or maybe the toughest is an unfair question. What are some of the things that make it so challenging?
I think some of the things for me, I mean, it's probably different for different people, but
Yeah.
my mind goes so fast. And so to stop the trying to fix things, stop trying to provide my answers, and slow down to just be with people, that is truly a skill that I've had to develop. It is not a gift that I was born with. Yeah.
I think a lot of physicians struggle with that too.
Oh, I bet. Yeah.
We want to fix things. And
Yeah.
it's interesting, you know, how does somebody define the word fix? I mean, how a physician would like to fix something might be different than how a patient would like to fix something.
Yeah, but yeah, there is something about creating change quickly as opposed to just being in the dung heap, so to speak. Um, yeah, and trusting that the what needs to arise will arise. What needs to be known will come and be known. That's, I mean, I could do that with CPE students. It's yeah, day in and day out. That's a hard thing.
Is the dung heap the suffering, or is that the hospital? Or
Oh, that's from Job, actually, from the Old Testament. I'm sorry, but yeah, he was, woe is me, and he was, yeah.
all right, well, wonderful. And then, so looking back, you've got your whole career now that you're retired to reflect on. What what sort of advice would you offer to those of us who are newer in our careers? And in particular, what sort of advice would you offer to a younger version of yourself?
Mm. One of the pieces of advice, well, two things. One is really get to know yourself, but also trust yourself. You are okay. You know, the language I would use is God made you just the way you need to be. What you need to do, though, is learn who that is. And that will help you find what path you need to go on. That will help you understand what your gifts are. It will help you understand what your stumbling blocks are because they're all inside of you. So there's a whole lot of self-awareness that is just central to, I think, being in chaplaincy. I actually think it's central to being a good doctor too, and a good leader. Yeah.
It's interesting to think about all the changes I even went through when I started residency. Boy, I went into residency thinking I was going to do something entirely different. I mean, this wasn't even on my radar, and how many years it took to find myself and what really, where my tribe really was.
That's interesting because what I was working on today has to do with people who are retiring from ministry. I get to preach at my big annual conference.
Yeah.
And the questions are, who am I and where do I belong? And that's the question that as we move into retirement, we ask again, that we knew who we were. We knew where we belonged then, but what now? It's interesting those two questions follow us throughout our lives.
Mm. So you're telling me that now that I have my answers, I have to ask them again?
At some point, but don't worry about it. Just enjoy the ride until it comes.
Yeah. Did Sue, did you have a mentor through your career?
I've had different mentors. I mean, I've had mentors in the CPE process, in the palliative care process, and my awareness. Um, I came across a gentleman named, now I'm blanking out, Leif Erikson Sr. When I met him, he was in his early 80s. He was the medical director in the South Market, South region, at Lakeland, Burlington area for palliative care for Aurora. He was a physician that had been a primary physician and then moved into palliative care, and he was still working in his 80s, which was pretty cool. And we became very good friends. And he taught me a lot just about the death and dying process from a medical view, and we just had a lot of conversations about the ethics and the process and the teams and what's involved. And I also just, the fact that he was later in life making these decisions had something to do with the choices he had already made. The awareness that he wasn't going to live forever, but the years that he had were really, really important.
Oh man, yeah.
Yeah, and so that was just, it was fascinating to be talking to someone who's like my father practically. I mean, his age was about the age of my dad. Um, Sharing about all these various things.
Was there anything particular about this Dr. Erickson, other than his agedness and his sort of wisdom and sort of fatherliness? There's something about the way he practiced or who he was.
Yeah, he cared for the whole person.
Sure.
I mean, he went into play, and he had a real calling for this. He went into nursing homes, places that doctors don't like going into. And he always carried a pocket of, in his pocket, like Hershey Kisses. And even if he wasn't visiting the patient, if he saw someone else, he would give them a Hershey Kiss and greet them and, and let them know that they were special. And that right there was very unique amongst physicians that I knew. Um,
It sounds like he
so
loved his job.
he did,
Yeah,
he did.
yeah.
And he lived it. I was with him. Uh, he started getting very, very sick. And I actually was with him and his wife when he was hospitalized and wasn't going to ever go back to work. And in the next, I would say, 6 weeks, he was quickly making decisions about his own health. And he thought that if he said, okay, I'm ready for hospice, wham, bam, thank you, ma'am, it's going to be over. And that wasn't quite the way it worked. He was around for a little longer than I think he wanted to be. But it was just a very sacred journey then that I got to have with him and his wife and family as he went through his own dying process.
Mm. I don't know how a lot of palliative care physicians die.
I don't know.
I
Yeah, I
would,
don't either.
I would think that with a career, sort of a lifetime of seeing other people do it, that they've prepared in some way or another.
I don't know. Sometimes I wonder if part of the reason we want to go into palliative care or go to places where we are close to those who are dying is
Mhm.
that we have a very healthy fear of it, that we want somehow to get the knowledge and that we somehow want to conquer it, which most of the time when we have that kind of sense of control or need for power over something, there's kind of a anxiety that lies underneath it. So we may know, and I think he knew, but up toward the end, he wasn't entirely happy about it.
Man, thank you.
Mhm.
How about maybe sharing something that you see that colleagues, maybe in particular chaplains, they struggle with early in their career, and some advice on how they could work on improving that and maybe becoming a strength?
Hmm. I think the the big question thing that I mentioned earlier, which is my challenge of trying to go in and fix things, or I think the other piece is to be in relations with. I think that one of the other things that's very hard about being a chaplain is being in relationship with someone but keeping some of your own stuff out of that relationship, that boundary piece, knowing, and that again goes back to knowing who you are, to knowing your story, to knowing how grandma's death impacted you. You know, our lives are kind of like another textbook that we need to explore when we are working in relationship with people, to know how to use them and how not to use them, how not to allow them to be projected on others. So that's part of it. And the other piece in relationships, how not to feel like we need to be liked.
Hmm.
We want to be trusted and we want to be present, but I think there are chaplains that I have seen that really want to be friends with everybody they see. And it's like, nah, that's not quite the
Hmm.
roles that we're in.
Hmm. Hmm. It's almost a bit more like a paternal or maternal role where you're trying to give people what they need or what they should have rather than being their best buddy.
I think it's a therapeutic role. I mean, it's the difference between, what's the difference between going to your friend's bedside and being with them and going to a patient's bedside. And on one level, there's not a lot of difference. And another level, there kind of is. And some of that too is how to keep how to be impacted by the people you're caring for, but not to be overly impacted. That their stories, their struggles don't become your struggles.
Yeah, I've heard a couple of versions of that over my career so far. I've had some people describe it as keeping your white coat thin but not transparent, and
And
some
knowing how to hang it up
hang it
and
up.
go home.
Yeah, that's so true too. But it's hard to sit in suffering or darkness with somebody and not absorb a little bit of that.
And I won't say that I think we do, but then what to do with it once we absorb it? How do we let go of it? How do we transform it somehow?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
man. Is um is there a particular case that stuck with you all these years?
Actually, one of the cases that stuck with me was for a very positive reason. It's one of the first ones that I was involved with. I have this wonderful gift of being able, this is true with students, I can be involved in people's lives and be there in the moment, and give me a week or so and I kind of forget a lot of it. It might be some level of dementia, I don't know, uh, but this particular gentleman was up in his late 80s and he was there was a he was dying, he was all alone, and I was probably 26 or something and went in to visit him, and so I was really new and didn't know what I was doing, but of all the patients I had visited, I felt really comfortable with him, and I was just kind of teasing him and talking to him at the beginning, and he knew he was sick, but he didn't know how sick. um, and when I left that room, I wondered what so different that I was so comfortable with him versus all the other patients. And I started going back to my own life and realizing that he reminded me a lot of my great grandfather. And when I was a little kid, I mean, my great grandfather died when I was 7. But when I was little, he lived behind us in a trailer, and I would go out and talk to him. He was my confidant, and he would sit in his chair and tell my sister and I to get up on the stump and do stump speeches, and he would clap and cheer,
Uh,
and I started realizing that this was what unconditional love was like. That being able to be free and be who I was and being applauded was a piece of an unconditional love. And that's what I was projecting on this patient. I don't know that he was giving it to me, although he seemed to appreciate who I was. But from there, I started realizing how much of my life was conditioned by what I thought others wanted of me and how I was trying to earn something. And when I kind of let that all go, and it took years to work through it, but when I came in touch with that, what it feels like to be free of some of those expectations, then I found my gifts. Then I found the connections. Then, yeah, it was kind of like, oh, thank you. And so that's not a real good, how did I care for somebody, but it's how they cared for me story.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And before we end with the poem piece, is there anything else that really is important to you that you wish I had asked or that you want to share? Or...
The piece that I miss about palliative care now is being able to be on the team and also having been able to help make it happen. I mean, having been there when there were about 7 of, not you, but of you, at St. Luke's and a few other hospitals in the beginning, and seeing that grow, and then to be a part of and getting other people a part of it in the different disciplines and it working together, that is so amazing and so rewarding for me. But a part of me misses being in that team and being with all of you amazing people. So I would want to share that with you and with the rest of the team.
Thank you. We miss you. I miss seeing you in the hallway and just stopping and talking and smiling. And
once in a while, I have gotten to St. Luke's for an appointment, and I'll sneak through back to hallways just to look for even like cleaning people. Anybody I can see. It's like, yes, I know you. Yeah.
Well, the final thing that we want to try to do with everybody is to share a poem, and if you could read it to us and then talk a little bit about why it calls to you so much.
Okay. Well, this poem is called I Will Not Die an Unlived Life. I will not die an unlived life. I will not live in fear of falling or catching fire. I choose to inhabit my days, to allow my living to open me, to make me less afraid, more accessible, to loosen my heart until it becomes a wing, a torch, a promise. I choose to risk my significance, to live so that which came to me as a seed goes to the next as a blossom. That which came to me as blossom goes on as fruit. It's by Donna Markova. And it touches me and it connects with me with palliative care for a couple of reasons. The author was the daughter of a man who had extreme alcoholism, and she actually had abuse. I mean, he was abusive to her and they were estranged for many, many years, but she was there when he was dying. And right after he died, she wrote this poem. And I think the poem is powerful. I mean, it's like standing in the face of death, recognizing how special it is just to have this gift of life, first of all. But in that situation, to transform a life that was so painful and pain producing into a gift of a poem
Mm.
that gave her hope and passed on hope to me, to others. There's power in that moment. So that's, yeah, I really like that poem. And that's how I tie it to palliative care and to being with those who are dying and finding treasures in the midst of sometimes the most difficult situations.
Hmm. No, well, thank you for sharing that. Yeah.
How's the family?
Good. I can't complain whatsoever. I mean, the 2.5-year-old Julian, he's testing, but that's what he's supposed to do. So
That's
that's
right.
good, good challenges to face.
Okay. So I will let you go so you can get home to them.
Yeah.
But thank you so much.
Oh yeah. Thank you, Sue. Thank you, Sue. I appreciate it. We all appreciate it.
Yeah. You're doing good work. You're doing important work.
I think we are. I think we are.